A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
So, there is this really chilling statistic in the military literature about civilian behavior during long conflicts, and it is something called the Week 3 spike. Basically, in the first week of a conflict, everyone is on high alert. Adrenaline is pumping, people are following every safety protocol to the letter, and everyone is sprinting to the shelter the second they hear a siren. But by week 3, even as the danger remains exactly the same or even increases, civilian injury rates actually start to climb. It is not because the weapons are getting more accurate, it is because the humans are getting tired.
It is a fascinating and terrifying phenomenon, Corn. Herman Poppleberry here, and today's prompt from Daniel is actually part 3 of our deep dive into the Israel Wartime Readiness Field Guide, version 5, updated as of March 2026. This specific section focuses on surviving the long haul, which means tackling alert fatigue, mental wellness, and community resilience. That week 3 spike you mentioned is the physical manifestation of what the guide calls alert fatigue. It is vital to understand that this is not a character flaw. It is not that people become less brave or more careless in a moral sense. It is that their biology is literally working against their survival.
Right, because we are not built to live in a state of high-intensity fight or flight for 21 days straight. Our systems just cannot sustain that level of cortisol without something breaking. Daniel's prompt today is really pushing us to look at the technical manual for human endurance when the sprint turns into a marathon. I think we should start with the neurology of it, because most people think alert fatigue is just being tired or lazy, but it is much more mechanical than that, is it not?
It is entirely mechanical, Corn. It is driven by a process called habituation. In neuroscience, we talk about the orienting response. That is the immediate physical and mental shift that happens when you perceive a new or threatening stimulus like a siren or a loud boom. Your amygdala, which is the threat detection center of your brain, flashes red. It dumps adrenaline and tells your body to move. But the brain is also an efficiency machine. If that stimulus repeats 50 times and 49 of those times nothing happens to you personally, your amygdala starts to desensitize. It decides that the siren is just background noise, like a car alarm in a city or a barking dog.
It is basically our brains trying to gaslight us into thinking we are safe, because the last 10 sirens did not result in a hit on our specific street. I have heard this called optimism bias, where you start to think, well, it has not hit me yet, so it probably won't. But in a conflict zone, that is a lethal logic. You are essentially gambling with your life based on a statistical misunderstanding.
The brain prioritizes comfort and energy conservation over a threat it perceives as low probability. The data from NATAL, which is the Israel Trauma and Resiliency Center, really backs this up. By late 2025, they were seeing that this habituation was the primary driver of risk-taking behavior. People would hear a siren, and instead of going to the mamad, the fortified room, they would stay on the couch or just move away from the window. The field guide is very clear that you cannot fight this with willpower alone. Willpower is a finite resource that runs out by week 3. You have to use mechanical countermeasures to bypass your own brain.
One of the suggestions in the guide that I found almost funny but very practical was the rule about keeping your shoes on. It sounds so simple, almost trivial, but the guide says the single biggest predictor of whether someone will actually seek shelter is whether they have shoes on their feet.
That is a perfect example of lowering the friction for the right behavior. If you are barefoot and the siren goes off at 2 in the morning, your brain calculates the effort of finding shoes, the discomfort of running on cold floors, and the time it takes to lace up. In that split second of calculation, the fatigue wins. You think, it is probably fine, I will stay in bed. But if your shoes are on, or even if you are sleeping in your clothes by the door, you have removed the cognitive load of making a decision. You just move. The guide calls this adapting the environment rather than trying to force the ego to be stronger. It is about making the safe choice the easiest choice.
I like that framing. Lower the effort, not the standard. It reminds me of the PAWS BED readiness test we have talked about in previous episodes. For those who missed it, that stands for power, alerts, water, shelter, bags, essentials, and dependence. It is a diagnostic tool for your household. Herman, can we walk through how that applies specifically to this long-haul phase? Because the requirements change when you are 3 weeks in.
They definitely do. In the long haul, the P for power means checking your power banks every single day during lulls. A for alerts means ensuring your Homefront Command app has not been silenced by your phone's battery saver mode. W for water is crucial. You need to maintain a baseline of 9 liters per person at all times. S for shelter means checking the seals on your mamad door, because repeated vibrations from nearby impacts can loosen the hardware. B for bags means rotating the snacks in your go bag so you are not eating expired crackers when you are already stressed. E for essentials includes a 72-hour buffer of all medications. And D for dependence is where the community aspect comes in.
The social component is huge. The guide mentions the neighbor's keeper strategy. This is a social accountability mechanism. If you know your neighbor is going to knock on your door or text you the second the all clear sounds, you are much more likely to go to the shelter. You do not want to be the one who did not show up and made everyone worry. We are social animals, and we can use that peer pressure to override the neurological fatigue. It is much harder to ignore a siren when you know someone is counting on seeing your face in the stairwell.
It really is. And the guide emphasizes talking about it too. Actually saying out loud to your family or your roommates, I am feeling alert fatigue right now. I really do not want to go to the shelter this time, so let's make sure we do it anyway. Just naming the monster makes it easier to manage. It turns a subconscious urge to stay on the couch into a conscious problem you can solve together.
Let's shift to the mental health data, because the numbers in the guide are staggering. We are looking at a massive surge in what the guide calls invisible wounds.
It is a total shift in the national psyche. The Ministry of Health released a report on March 9, 2025, showing a 471% increase in short-term therapy sessions compared to pre-conflict levels. About 32% of the population was requiring specialized psychological support by that point. We are talking about nearly 900,000 individuals projected to seek treatment for PTSD, anxiety, or depression in the coming years. This is why Moshe Bar Simon Tov, the Director General of the Ministry of Health, designated mental health as the top national priority.
I saw that, and the road accident data was particularly wild. A 21.6% spike in fatal road accidents. You would think people would drive more carefully during a war, but high cortisol levels and battle fatigue mean people are distracted, their reaction times are shredded, and they are making impulsive decisions behind the wheel. It is like the whole country is suffering from a collective lack of sleep and a permanent state of agitation.
That is why the wellness during protracted conflict section of the guide is so clinical. It does not talk about self-care in the way we usually hear it, like taking a bubble bath or practicing mindfulness. It talks about hygiene as a morale multiplier. It says you must shower when you can, eat regular meals even if you are not hungry, and maintain that 72-hour buffer of medication. These are tactical requirements for maintaining your ability to function. If you stop eating and sleeping, your judgment fails, and when your judgment fails, you die. It also mentions a 20% rise in stress-related cardiac events and immune system disorders like fibromyalgia. Your body is literally under siege from the inside.
It is about maintaining the machine. I notice the guide also mentions the wall protocol. This is for those quiet periods where there have not been alerts for a few hours or even a few days. My instinct during a lull would be to just collapse and sleep for 12 hours, but the guide says that is actually the most dangerous time for complacency.
The lulls are high-risk windows because infrastructure can fail during those times from previous damage you did not notice. The guide says you should use lulls to resupply ruthlessly. Top up your water to 9 liters per person, restock the pantry with canned goods, and charge every single power bank. But most importantly, it says you should check your gas lines and smoke detectors. Shaking from impacts can loosen gas fittings, and a fire during a lull is just as deadly as a missile. You also need to check your car's fuel. Keep it at least half full because queues will be massive the moment the alerts start again.
And that is when you do the laundry and take a real shower. It is about reclaiming a sense of normalcy so you can face the next round. Herman, I want to talk about the community aspect because this is something that feels very specific to the Israeli context, but has universal applications. The shield for the elderly protocols. You were looking at the data on how many seniors actually have access to fortified rooms.
It is pretty sobering, Korn. About 20% of elderly citizens in older apartment blocks do not have a mamad. They are relying on stairwells or internal hallways. The guide emphasizes that if you are a younger or more mobile neighbor, you need to establish a buddy system before the escalation starts. Exchange keys, know their medication schedule, and help them configure the Homefront Command app on their phones. The guide suggests sleeping in the mamad with elderly patients if you are a caregiver, just to avoid the physical strain of trying to move them quickly during a night alarm.
I was reading about the Medical Information Mobility Law from July 2024. They expanded it so that local community response teams can access basic medical records for vulnerable people in their specific neighborhood. So, if a building is hit, the first responders already know that the person in apartment 4 is diabetic or has mobility issues. It is a high-tech way to handle a very old-school problem of looking out for your neighbor.
There are now over 900 of these trained community response teams nationwide. They are using video calls to check in on seniors, not just for physical safety, but to prevent the cognitive decline that comes with isolation. When you are stuck in a safe room for days, the lack of social stimulation can be devastating for someone with early-stage dementia or even just general loneliness. Social connectivity is literally a survival tool.
It really is. Now, what about the kids? Because that is where the emotional weight really hits. The pediatric health data from December 2025 showed a 4% decline in birth rates and a massive rise in sleep disturbances among toddlers. The guide mentions the Hibuki dolls. I had to look that up. Hibuki. It means huggy in Hebrew.
The Hibuki doll is a brilliant intervention used in the Merkaze Chosin, or resilience centers. It is a therapeutic doll with long arms that can wrap around a child. The child is told that the doll is the one who is scared, and the child's job is to protect and comfort the doll. By taking care of the doll, the child gains a sense of agency and processes their own trauma through a proxy. It shifts them from being a passive victim of the noise to an active protector.
It is amazing how such a simple physical object can act as psychological armor. But the guide also gives some pretty stern warnings to parents about media exposure. It calls it secondary traumatization. Even if the child is safe in a mamad, if they are watching graphic news footage on a loop, their brain processes it as if they are in immediate danger.
The recommendation is to limit news to once every few hours for adults and 0 for children. You have to be the filter. You tell them, yes, it is scary, but we have a plan, our safe room is strong, and we are together. Maintaining routines, even small ones like bedtime stories or regular meal times in the shelter, is the most effective way to prevent clinical level anxiety later on. You are building a psychological buffer.
It really puts the term surviving the long haul into perspective. It is not just about the duration of the conflict itself, but the years of recovery afterward. The guide emphasizes that you have to give yourself permission to function imperfectly. You're not going to be the best version of yourself during a war. You're going to be irritable. You're going to forget things, and you're going to be exhausted. And the guide says that is okay. Safety first, then well-being, then everything else.
I think that prioritization is the key takeaway for our listeners. When you are overwhelmed, you look at that list: water, meds, power, food, in that order. If you have those 4, you can survive the next 24 hours. Everything else is a luxury that you can deal with during the next lull. If you are feeling alert fatigue, reframe it. Tell yourself, I am not tired of the sirens, my brain is just trying to save energy. Then, put your shoes on and go to the shelter anyway.
We should probably mention the emergency numbers too, just for the record. The guide lists Iran at 1201 and Natal at 1-800-363-303. These are the front lines for the invisible wounds we've been talking about.
They have handled over 3.5 million treatment sessions by this point in 2026. It is an incredible scale of support, and it is all based on this idea that alert fatigue is a neurological reality, not a character flaw. If you are feeling it, you are not weak. You are just human. Your brain is doing exactly what it was evolved to do. It is just doing it in an environment where that response is dangerous.
That feels like a good place to start wrapping this up. We have covered the neurology of why we stop listening to sirens, the physical requirements for staying sane, and how to look out for the most vulnerable people in our buildings. It is a lot to take in, but it all comes back to that idea of a system. You do not need to be a hero. You just need to follow the protocol.
The protocol is what keeps you alive when your brain is tired. We actually did a deep dive on the immediate physical response to sirens in episode 1118, which we called the 90-second sprint. That episode is really the foundation for what we talked about today. If you haven't mastered that 90-second move to safety, the long-haul strategies won't matter much. We also covered the historical context of this escalation in episode 691, the long alert.
That is a great callback. If you are enjoying this mini-series on the Wartime Readiness Field Guide, we would love for you to leave a review on whatever podcast app you are using. It really helps other people find the show, especially now that we are deep into this series.
Thanks as always to our producer Hilbert Flumingtop for keeping us on track. And a big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power the research and generation of this show.
You can find the full archive and search for specific topics at myweirdprompts.com. We will be back next time with part 4 of this series, where we will be looking at the logistics of long-term displacement and what happens when you cannot stay in your home.
This has been My Weird Prompts. Stay safe out there.
See ya!
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the flows from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird Prompts, until next time, stay curious, keep